wasn't really into football. I was really into science and electric things. I pulled all the plugs apart when I was a kid. We had a mission at school called a Caring Church Week, and there were different priests and religious came from all over the country. And they introduced us to some lively worship, and that sort of got me intrigued. And of course, I was a musician, so I used to play the guitar and began to play the guitar at Mass and in a folk group. So in many ways, the fact that I was like struggling a bit with my faith, it was through music that it all started to be secured. I have a great love of St. Francis of Assisi. I first went there when I was 13 to Assisi, my first trip to Italy. And I loved that simplicity of faith and poverty of life that really inspired. When I was first joined, we were on Social Security, as they called it then. We felt, no, well, if God really wants this, we should not claim that money off the state. So I'll never forget the day we went to the Social Security office and said, we want to sign off. And the woman said, have you got a job? I said, no. we think God's going to provide. And she just looked at us like we're completely mad. But extraordinarily, we did live in God's providence.
Pope Benedict the 16th?
Yeah.
He visited, there's only been 2 papal visits, right, to England, I believe, and one of them was in 2010.
Yeah.
And you were quite involved in that.
Yes,
I mean, get to meet him.
The whole visit, obviously, I had a small part, but when the Pope came to us, it was major. In the end, it became this enormous gathering because we had all the bishops, all the press corps, the seminarians from all the seminaries, all coming to Oscott that day. So it was an enormous organisation, and then, of course, you had all the secret services and checking the building beforehand for any devices, and guys with machine guns on the roof of the building, and oh gosh, the whole thing was an extraordinary experience.
Welcome to Shekinah Europe. Yes, Lord, here I am at St. Michael's Roman Catholic Church in the parish of Blessed Carlo Acutis. I'm joined by Father Mark, and here we're just going to discuss his vocational journey and how he became a priest. So, Father Mark, it's great to be with you here today. I think just to start us off, what was life like for you growing up, and did you always want to become a priest?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in Birmingham, on the outskirts of Birmingham, and I had 3 older sisters. I was the youngest child in a Catholic family. We used to go to Mass every Sunday when I was a kid. From an early age, I started thinking about priesthood. When I was about 5 or 6, I first started thinking about it. And that kind of remained with me until I sort of reached the teens, and then I started thinking perhaps I wouldn't do it, and I kind of pushed it aside really during my teens.
Yeah, and sort of in that, when you're that age, what was your favourite sort of subjects growing up, and also like interests, like football?
Yeah, I wasn't really into football. I was really into science and electric things. I pulled all the plugs apart when I was a kid and was doing minor wiring jobs in the house from about the age of 8, and I adored physics at school. It was the only subject that you didn't have to push me to do my homework. I just really enjoyed physics. That was my great love at school.
Do you like maths as well?
Maths, okay, but the number crunching used to bore me. I liked the principles more.
And what about RE or religious?
We did primary school. Lots of lovely memories of RE at primary school. Secondary school, it wasn't taught very well, and it was a bit odd, really. So it was more in secondary school. I got more nourishment from my faith from home, really, than in school.
And Did you do any altar serving? And also,
Yes.
yeah.
Both my parents were in the choir, so I kind of spent a lot of time in the choir as a kid. But then I did start altar serving. I served till I was about 13, and I kind of lost interest in my teens. It just didn't feel cool to be doing things like that.
Yeah, and so when you were your teens, that like was about 13, 14, was there a period where you were like away from the church, or were you just always have your eyes on Christ? Were you always set on
I
Him?
wouldn't say always have my eyes on Christ, but I certainly in my head was drifting a little bit. But I was at home and we all went to Mass, so it wasn't so much a thing you had a choice about when I was growing up. But it wasn't, I used to pray, but I just wasn't sure about the church, I think, as a teenager.
It was just like something that your family did, and so you just did it that way.
Yeah.
I'd also like to go through, if you're interested to hear, going into sort of high school, I suppose you mentioned your teenage years, were there any what sort of the most challenging, was there anything that challenged your faith at all? Like maybe there's like one particular thing, or maybe it's lots of different things?
So it was one particular thing. I just think it was just peer pressure of other teenagers saying it's a load of rubbish and, don't bother with that kind of thing. It was wearing out at me, and I wasn't sure about putting my head over the parapet, even though in some ways I think I always did have something inside that wanted to be more religious and talk about my faith. But I think I was quite shy as a teenager, and those kind of pressures from the group sort of thing made me unsure, really.
You mentioned that burning desire, What do you think that was, and where do you think that was from?
Well, presumably it was from God, but there was always something inside me which, in those years, made me turn to prayer in difficulties and challenges.
Like, what sort of prayers would you sort of accustom yourself to? Would it be like set prayers, or be like group prayer?
No, it was more, just conversations with Jesus kind of thing as a teenager. I wasn't involved in any particular prayer group or anything. Those things didn't really exist, really. Prayer groups kind of started bubbling up in the church in the 70s and stuff, but around that time, we had a mission at school.
Yeah.
Called a Caring Church Week, and there were different priests and religious came from all over the country, and they introduced us to some lively worship, and that sort of got me intrigued. And of course, I was a musician, so I used to play the guitar and began to play the guitar at Mass and in a folk group. So in many ways, the fact that I was struggling a bit with my faith, it was through music that it all started to be secured, actually.
Would you say that, still to this day, music is a big part of your faith? I mean, do you still play the guitar today?
Very rarely, yeah. But music, I sing a lot at Mass, and I like to encourage musicians at Mass, and I think music and worship are very, very linked and very important, yeah.
Yeah, and so you spoke. So going on to your faith journey, I suppose the big part of going into seminary. How old were you when you actually went into seminary?
Well, I was in the sixth form. The new rite of penance. When we say the new rite, it's over 50 years old now. But the new rite of penance was coming out in about 1975, and they were 76, and we had some special talks which were done in Birmingham, and I went along to them, and at that point I wasn't going to confession. I didn't believe that it was of any use as a teenager. And these discussion groups at these talks, I realized I had something to say, and I was quite fascinated by the whole thing. And it started making me think about confession again. And that led to a whole journey where some students from the seminary came into our school, and they invited us one evening to all go out for a drink. We were sixth formers, so some of us weren't 18 at that point. And we were all having a chat in the pub, and I was saying how I didn't really accept confession. And this student said, "Oh, you must come and meet a mate of mine." Mm-hmm. So I didn't quite know what was going on, and we drove off to Birmingham University chaplaincy. Mm. And I knew then I was meeting this priest, but he was in a t-shirt and jeans, and we said, "Oh, do you want a coffee?" And we all got a coffee. And then this student ran out the room, and this guy said, "Do you want to go to confession then?" So I was manipulated into the sacrament. But it was really liberating. Mm. And immediately I started thinking about the priesthood again. Mm. It was like something was released. Mm. And so I contacted the seminary, said, "I want to be a priest, what do I do?" And they said, "Well, you don't speak to us." And then they put me in touch with the vocations director. Mm. And this was all just before Easter in my upper sixth. Mm. I had a place at university to do physics. And that was where I thought I was going. But after seeing the vocations director, I saw the bishop within a week, the archbishop. And within 2 weeks of deciding to be a priest again, it's quite dramatic. It would never happen today. I knew I was going to Rome to study for the priesthood in the October. It was a crazy 2 weeks of my life.
So would you say that it was the confession, going to confession sort of initiated?
Yeah, it released something within me.
And it'd be interesting to know how long it was between that confession and the previous one. I don't know if you have any idea.
I have no idea. Yeah, I stopped going when my early teens, so it could have been 5 years.
Oh, wow.
6 years.
So it's maybe a lot of things stored up, it just released. Yeah. So what was it that made you speak to the vocations director and sort of press ahead with it? Because some people might dither, and some people, what made you just be, so you could say, courageous?
Yeah, it was the fact that after that confession, it just opened up something, and I just felt God was calling me to be a priest, as I had done when I was a child. And the pressure really was for me to give in and say yes. And once I said yes, then I just wanted to run with it.
And did you, anyone sort of encourage you or inspire you to go forward with seminary, or did you just completely make the decision yourself? And did you sort of talk to anyone?
That's a very hard question to answer, because there were all sorts of people. My father had a very strong Catholic faith, and also was very wise and balanced. So he was an amazing image for me, a role model. There was a wonderful German priest who my father was friends with, who they met after the Second World War. And when I was growing up, we met him a few times. He was very lively and fun, and that inspired me a bit as a kid. And then Bishop David McGough, who we had his funeral last month, when he was a deacon, our house was the first house he visited, and he used to come at tea time sometimes. And he was a deacon, and I saw him and thought, "Oh, he's a nice person. I could do this, But there's a whole variety of people, really.
Yeah. And I suppose going to Rome, how was that? Getting off the plane, and presumably you did go by plane. But how did that how long were you going to be away for, and how was that moving? It's a completely different country.
I mean, it's amazing how much has changed, even since when I was a student for the priesthood. Up to about 1972, when you went to Rome, you were there for 3 years, then you had a little holiday, then another 4 years. You only came home once.
Yeah.
But that had changed by the time I was there in 1977. So, when I went out at mid-September, I didn't come back to England till the next July.
Wow.
So it was a big break.
Yeah.
And there were no mobile phones. used to have airmail letters to write home, and I had one phone call on Christmas Day with my family. So it was a massive break.
Yeah.
And it was scary, leaving everyone and just going off to another country. But I have to say, as soon as I got there, I just loved it immediately. I loved Rome as a city. I loved the whole culture, Italian culture. Somehow I felt it sort of made me come alive more when I was there.
What would you say you loved most about it? Like, it's probably you could maybe spend all day saying 'cause there's so much richness.
Yeah. Well, I love the sun. So the fact that it's warm, you're outside more. People emotionally are more outward than we are in England. Religion is expressed much more creatively on the whole. It's just more lively, and the food and the wine, the whole culture is just more, to me, at that age. I mean, I'd been to Rome at the age of 13 on holiday, and that had really inspired me. So to have the opportunity to go and live there was fantastic.
Would you say that like these parts from your past sort of, I don't know, don't really foreshadow, but sort of, it's funny how things, because I remember you said about you're 5 or 6, you had that first sort of inclination, and he's going to Rome, and it's, I don't know, it's just quite interesting how things work, really. But I think something I wanted to touch on was about when you're in Rome, what is like the first week when you're there? Like, did you have any sort of feelings that, any sort of inclination side that you wanted to go back? Any sort of, not regret, but any sort of feelings of, what have I done?
You know, not in that first week, no.
Oh, wow.
No, I just really like came alive. It's really extraordinary. I mean, later on, when you get through the trials, I mean, it's not easy, seminary. There are all sorts of times later on where I thought, what am I doing? And of course, I did leave without being ordained because I did have a big crisis and decided not to be a priest. But not in those first months. It was just the whole thing seemed fantastic.
And what was your biggest challenge there in that first year? Was it like on an intellectual level? Was it on your faith? Like, was there any barriers in your belief?
I wouldn't say my faith was challenged much in that first year. It was more the language, struggling, learning philosophy in Italian and things like that. That was a real struggle. Those are the main struggles. No, the sort of struggles with faith came more later on. And but that first year, it was mainly difficult at university and just trying to adjust to life in a seminary, I suppose. Yeah.
So, was it smooth sailing seminary? Did you just get there and then enter into your first year, then we just ordained 6 or 7 years later?
No.
Yes. What exactly happened?
An awful lot happened while I was there, but without sort of trying to dig up the past from years ago. I mean, basically, I was growing up, finding myself, who I was, beginning to be a bit disillusioned with some of the failings I saw in the church, being disillusioned with my own inability to do what I was supposed to do, struggles with prayer, and an awful lot of confusion about who I am and where I fit in, and a struggle with relationships and so on. Really, eventually, I felt I couldn't resolve them. Having gone into seminary at 18, I felt I needed to get out. And so in my 5th year, I should have been preparing for diaconate. This pressure within me, this isn't working. It got too much, and I just had to say, I can't do this.
Do you think perhaps you looking back, do you think you went into seminary too young, or do you think it was still God's plan? And
It's a hard thing to answer because I have no regrets because the journey all worked out in the end. I think more so today, 18 is a bit young to go to seminary. But I'm not saying it can't be done, but I certainly needed to work out a few more things about who I was.
And you mentioned about being disillusioned with the church.
Yeah.
Was anything particular at that age that was sort of bothering you to an extent?
It's a bit hard to remember, really. It's a long time ago. It was kind of seeing people being too caught up in externals and not really being. I have a great love of St. Francis of Assisi. I first went there when I was 13 to Assisi, my first trip to Italy. And I loved that simplicity of faith and poverty of life that really inspired me. And I just found that at times living in Rome that people were just caught up in all the externals and not really addressing the very kind of things that I felt Jesus had asked us to address. But when I look back, I see a bit of hypocrisy and arrogance within myself at that age. I mean, all I needed to do was to sort myself out, really. But that's the way I felt.
Yeah, it's a part of the journey.
Yeah.
And you mentioned it's like welling up and something inside of you is like, get out. What do you think that, looking back, what do you think that was? Do you think that was just part of your journey, or do you think it was God? And do you think it's the right thing as well?
I think it was from God. Yeah, I think God wanted me to be authentic, and I was feeling very inauthentic. I mean, it's very interesting because the day of the ordination of my year, which is in this beautiful place outside Rome in the hills, this gorgeous place. The Italians call it the antechamber of paradise because it's such a beautiful place. They were ordained, and I was there, and I sang at their ordination. Because I was so at peace after I made that decision that I wasn't ready. I felt somewhere I got to do something different.
You just like felt like steadiness, would you say? First time in a long time.
Yeah.
And I suppose when you stepped out, was it your start of your fourth year? Was it
at the end of my fifth year?
End of your fifth year.
Yeah.
And how was that? How did you, not negotiate it, but how did you communicate that with family, friends, other people at seminary? I mean, like, how did you sort of break the news?
Oh my goodness, that wasn't particularly easy.
Yeah.
I upset a lot of people and caused big distress in my family. But it had to be done, you know. Sometimes in life, things are hard, but you know that's the right thing. But it was a very, very difficult time.
How do you find sort of wisdom and courage to know when to do that? Because there may be like many people who, I think you even said that you felt it was from God.
Yeah.
Like, where do you find wisdom and courage from, or to make that right, where you know it's right, but you know that 99% of people around you are saying it's wrong? Like,
yeah, I mean, I think through prayer, if you sense a peace of mind in a decision, you know, I think that's a great consolation. And certainly in my life, when I'm mixed up inside, it destroys all my confidence. But when I do feel a sense of inner peace, I become more confident. Which is certainly the way I felt when I finally was ordained. But that's in a few minutes' time, probably.
I also want to speak about how important is the Blessed Sacrament to you back then, but also now.
Yeah, I think time spent before the Blessed Sacrament has always meant a lot to me. And even in that very rocky period, you know, those months, going back to spending time in adoration was a firm anchor. And it has been ever since, really. So to me, it's an essential part of not just priesthood vocation, but any vocation, is to be able to be in quiet before the Lord, because quite often there's so much stuff going on inside my head. It's very good to just be and to either talk about it or just let go of it or whatever. But it's, to me, the Blessed Sacrament is like a rock, really. That's my best way to describe it.
So in your first 5 years of seminary, so Blessed Sacrament's very important, but was there a particular favourite theologian or saint or particular reading that really gripped or inspired you? Or even a particular sort of topic that, because I know you've got a physics background, but I wonder if that sort of correlated to...
During my time in seminary, really, it was still, I used to go to Assisi every year. St. Francis and St. Clare were very, very big in my journey, as you'll hear later in the journey. But so those would be my favourite saints. Although I began to get to know St. Ignatius a lot earlier because we were taught by Jesuits. In terms of theologians, I think one of the problems of me going young and studying in Italian, I think there were lots of reasons why I think I had to leave. But one was I wasn't quite grasping the intellectual side as well as I should have done, really. We were taught, Rana was the big theologian when I was there, and I found him quite difficult to understand. And it's really interesting, and later in life, like Pope Benedict, Ratzinger is so much easier for me to understand than Rana was. But we didn't read any of him then, so it's all part of life's journey.
God has a plan.
Yeah.
So you've mentioned Assisi a lot. I'd love to hear, and you mentioned when you're 13, went to Assisi, and you keep going back, you kept going back. What is it that draws you to Assisi and St. Francis?
It's very hard to answer some of these questions because I don't really know why. I mean, when I was a child and we were at primary school, people would talk about St. Francis and the animals and that. But that was never really a significant thing for me. When I went to Assisi, it's exactly the same month as Zeffirelli's film, Brother, Sun, Sister, Moon, was released and was in the cinemas. So I saw the film and then went to Assisi about 2 weeks later. It was really the authenticity, I think, and the poverty, which really spoke to me, that he trusted completely in God and nothing else mattered. And also the joy out of that simplicity. It was a pure message. You have to think back as well. We're talking about 1973, and it was the flower power time and hippies, and my eldest sister lived in a commune and she was a hippie, and there was all that sort of mingled in as well. A bit of early ecology and all that kind of stuff. So a lot of factors, but really with St. Francis, it was the purity, simplicity and joy which attracted me.
Yeah. Mentioned in the Bible about Lazarus and the rich man.
Yeah.
Is that sort of similar sort of message?
Yeah. You see, Francis was from a wealthy middle-class background, and he gave up everything to live with the poor and to minister to them, which I thought was a very powerful message. Plus the fact that Assisi is, the trouble is, you see, if you've got all of that, but Assisi is also a very beautiful place, stunning place. So there's also mixed motives there,
Yeah, they still maintained it then?
Yeah, it's still a wonderful place.
It's like they haven't built up anything much? Or...
Well, fortunately, it's up a mountain, so all the building up's in the valley. But the ancient town, you can literally just walk where his house is.
Oh, wow.
Walk past Claire's house, and you can see where he was baptized. And
it's amazing that it's still there.
Yeah.
I'll have to visit.
Yeah, you will. And Blessed Carlo's buried in the next few streets away. Because he loved Assisi as a child as well, you see. Hence
he's this Blessed Carlo,
the patron of his parish
as well. So yeah, it's everything's come full circle. I really want to also explore, so straight at your years, basically, or your time between leaving seminary and re-entering again. What, I don't know, what sort of journey you went through in that time, and what you actually did, whether what job and.
I mean, it was a very dramatic time in my life. When I left seminary that summer, that peace of mind, as soon as I'd gone, turned into, because I was insecure and didn't know what I was going to do, it turned into a lot of resentment, thinking, why I've wasted my life so far, and do I really believe in God anymore? And I really sank very quickly. Meanwhile, in God's plan, in that last year, there was a seminarian, a first year from Yorkshire. And when I told him I was leaving, he was really angry with me. And he then invited me. They had a little prayer group, he and some of his friends, which I went to, and he was charismatic, and I wasn't very impressed at all. But I liked the people and was impressed by them. And during that summer, I was really, as I said, sinking spiritually and psychologically. And he invited me up to South Yorkshire to this prayer group where he was based. And this prayer group had just been going for a few years, and they'd formed a community and were living by a rule that the parish priest had written. And he wanted to call them the brothers and sisters of the Sacred Heart of Jesus and the Immaculate Heart of Mary. But what they were called was the Maltfriscans, because that was the nickname that people called them, because they came from Maltby in South Yorkshire, and they were following St. Francis of Assisi. So they were called Maltfriscans. So can you see how my journey was like? It was kind of this collision was destined to happen. He invited me up, and I met them. And they kept praying over me, and I kept saying, that you're all lovely people, but it's not really affecting me, But eventually, it rubbed off, and I was going to go to London and look for work, but I hadn't a clue what. But when I met this community, the parish priest, Father Leonard May, he was saying, we want to start a community of brothers and sisters, a new community within this prayer group, of people who would be following St. Francis and living in little communities in the city. And I think God's asking you to do this. And I said yes, because it suddenly kind of rekindled all that disillusionment. So I joined. I became a Maltfriscan in 1982, and I am still one now today, all these years later.
And how long were you, so how long after leaving seminary was that you entered that community? Was it in the same summer?
That was by the October.
And
yes, it was all very dramatic.
Yeah. And so again, as another instance, you saying yes, how long was it for you to just decide to make that yes? Was it just literally same day? You're just yep. Or did you go home, think about it?
Yeah, it was over a period of a few days. And then I went home and thought about it and then went back, yeah.
And when you were applying for jobs in London, so what?
Well, I didn't get that far.
Did you?
Yeah, that was the plan, but I never got there.
Oh, because this came up a lot sooner.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. So in this community, how long was it before you then re-entered seminary between that?
Yeah,
and anything else?
I mean, it completely took off. So gradually there was another brother. Well, he was kind of the founder, and I joined him. And then there was two sisters, and then it grew, and we had a community of brothers and sisters. And we used to do a lot of evangelization. So we'd do street evangelization. We would do a lot of youth work. We used to go around to schools, went all over the country doing mission work. So this really took off, and I really forgot the idea of ever being a priest. I really felt in that period that my vocation was to be a Maltfriscan brother, living in poverty, trust and obedience in community. We felt that if God really wanted it, when I was first joined, we were on Social Security, as they called it then. We felt, no, well, if God really wants this, we should not claim that money off the state. So I'll never forget the day we went to the Social Security office and said, we want to sign off. And the woman said, have you got a job? I said, no. we think God's going to provide. And she just looked at us like we're completely mad. But extraordinarily, we did live in God's providence all through that period. And one of the crazy moments for me, we're talking about the time when Mrs. Thatcher was the Prime Minister. And we lived in these two houses, the sisters and the brothers. And the sisters' house was being supported by the parish priest, but we were paying rent to the diocese. And fortunately, money was coming in to pay the rent. But then one day I had a letter from Rotherham District Council. Said, dear Mr. Crisp, we see you're self-employed, low income, and therefore you qualify for housing benefit. To actually have a letter from them was absolutely crazy, you know, because normally you had to like beg for it.
Yeah.
So it was extraordinary. I could tell you all sorts of stories about that period, but it was very, very blessed. And of course, it was about St. Francis, and it was very charismatic, which initially I found difficult, but I gradually got into it. And we did a lot of youth work, as I say, missions and so on.
That's interesting to ask about you doing street evangelization with the community, and because you mentioned you're quite shy.
Yeah.
I don't know if you carried that through to your young adulthood, but how did you find that? And did it boost your confidence, or maybe did it dwindle it?
I found it very, very hard. I learned an awful lot about trusting in the Holy Spirit in those situations. The kind of street evangelization we did was very much through music. So we would sing, leave that talking to people up to other people. I was just quite happy doing the music side. Yeah. But that's quite Franciscan, that you kind of, it's like Pope Benedict say, you evangelize through beauty, you know, you use music. So I was much happier with a guitar in front of me singing, to be quite honest. Yeah. But I remember the first time we went to speak in a school, standing on stage, and they were talking, and they like pointed to me to talk. And really, I just felt like dying on the spot. I was so nervous. But yeah, it really did help overcome a lot of that shyness. And
how did you move from the community to going into seminary? Like, what's sort of the bridge?
Well, again, they weren't bridges; they were eruptions. You know, that was from 1982 to 89, so that was, you know, quite a few years, 7 years. It grew for quite a while, and lots of blessings and all sorts of amazing things happened in that time. But it's interesting, the more you know about religious life and these really ancient rules, which, you know, of St. Benedict, over 1,000 years old, you learn the wisdom that they were there. And that our rule of life was very good in terms of like being radical, but it was inhuman. And one by one, we were struggling humanly to live that lifestyle. And some of the sisters started leaving, and then I was like having doubts, and the other brother, he was not sure he was going to carry on. And it was very sad because it had been this exciting project, but each of us, it wasn't working out. So I went on a retreat, a Jesuit retreat, 8-day retreat in Liverpool, a silent retreat, to really seek God's will, to say, you know, I'm not just going to leave this because it's not working, but what's your will? And again, in that retreat, I had a very, very clear calling on the 5th day that I should leave, but not leave in a negative sense, but that I got to go for another move forward. Because I think when you're answering God's call, it's never really a no. It's a yes to something. It's a yes to life. But again, that was very hard going back and saying that, because when I left, it meant really that the brothers really would not continue.
Yeah.
And so that was a hard moment. But again, that when you've got that inner sense that you can face anything really. So I left, and I'll never forget the day I left. I had 3 bags, and I got the train, and my parents were visiting my sister in New Zealand, so I had to get across to my sister's. Well, the nearest train station was Stoke-on-Trent to her, but I had to change somewhere. Burton-on-Trent, that's right. And it was a horrible February, cold, wet day. And I had 3 bags, and I was 29, and I kept thinking, you're nearly 30. What have you done with your life now, sort of thing. But I came back, stayed with my sister, and then came back to my parents when they came back in Birmingham, and quickly got a job as an auxiliary nurse, healthcare assistant, you call it now, at a cancer hospice in Birmingham, just to get a job.
Yeah.
Which was something helping people. And it was during that time, that 18 months doing that job, that gradually I started thinking, well, what about priesthood after all? And at first I kind of fought that, but as soon as I gave into it, it really started getting strong again. And I applied for the diocese and then went back to...
Was it 2 more years you did as well?
I did a year.
Oh wow, then you were ordained.
The Archbishop, Maurice Couve de Merville, who was a real character. Once he knew I'd come back, he wasn't really interested in wasting much time.
So you like sign him up?
He would have made me go through even quicker, but I went back to the seminary after 18 months in the hospice, and by the November, he was saying, why don't we ordain you priest next year? I said, hold on, I was only nursing a few months ago. So I was ordained deacon the following summer and priest in the November. So it was, the whole thing was 18 months.
Oh, wow. And what was it like going back in for that last 18 months? Was it, I don't know, was it humbling or was it exciting?
Yeah, it was, it was a different experience. So I was older and I had all this experience in the Montfriscans, which even now has completely shaped my spirituality. Yeah. So I was going into it in a different way. Also, it was at Oscut in Birmingham, it wasn't in Rome, so it was quite a different situation. But it was just very affirming. It was like everything was falling into place.
And when you've had to make big decisions, what would you say has been maybe the fulcrum, but yeah, what's sort of been the underlying theme, if I could say that? So when you've had to make big decisions, what have you always done beforehand?
I think, I don't find making decisions easy at all. So turmoil, a lot of turmoil. And then when I find peace, at that point I run with it. I'd say that's how I make decisions.
And what would you say the peace?
Peace of heart.
Peace of heart.
Yeah, peace of mind, what you want to call it. But that once, through prayer, discussion, and so on, once that peace of mind is found, then I just go for it, because there's no point hanging around, you know.
Yeah.
Because you're just worn out by the turmoil, you know.
Yeah. That's like the pearl, I suppose, in the parable. So once you find it, you put everything on it, really. So on a night of your ordination, on the day of your ordination, can you remember, if you could take yourself back to what you were feeling or on the morning? Yeah, like what was that? What was that like?
Well, obviously there's different levels of feelings, because you're very nervous about the whole service and everything.
Yeah, of course.
But inside, it's the point I was making earlier, when I was leaving seminary the first time, all that chaos and turmoil. the day of my ordination, I felt spiritually like I was sitting back in a comfy chair. Somehow, the shape was fitting the hole. It just felt the right place to be.
Like everything just fitted together.
Yeah, which it hadn't when I was young.
And so, anyone sort of discerning their vocation, what if there's one bit of advice you'd give someone? It could be any vocation, but like someone who's 18 to 25, who just feels maybe like there could be someone who feels completely lost, maybe someone who's just a bit lukewarm. But like one bit of advice, what would you give?
One bit, I mean,
well, it could be three, maybe.
It could be a one topic. First of all, that God is calling. That has to be within this. It's not just all about me. That God is calling, and that whatever God is calling us to, even though there'll be massive challenges, will bring us the fullness of life. So that's not to say there won't be sacrifices, but to have a sense that God calls us to life, that has to be there. If you're not believing that, you may as well go home. Then I'd say self-knowledge. Coming to know yourself, how you tick, what ignites your interests and so on, and what doesn't, and knowing your weaknesses. That's a good journey to go. But if it's just that sense of God calling you to life, you won't go anywhere. So I'd say it's those two things, really.
Like put together, a combination of them. And so now you're the Dean of Wolverhampton,
yes.
I believe.
I have to say Dudley and Wolverhampton,
Dudley.
in case anyone's listening.
Can't forget Dudley. So you're the Dean of Dudley and Wolverhampton. So since being ordained a priest and becoming the Dean of Dudley and Wolverhampton, what's been the most challenging, like sort of season that you faced that, and also what's been like the brightest, what's been the most joyful?
Quite a few on the way, really. You're talking about 30 years of priesthood. A lot's happened, really. I mean, when I was ordained, as I say, I felt I'm in the right place. But I also felt, I've had a checkered career. I've done all this crazy stuff. I'll be happy just to be an assistant priest somewhere and just get on with it. That was what I wanted to do. But very quickly, I was asked to be vocations promoter within 6 months. And was quite shocked by that. But then as soon as I started doing the work of promoting vocations, I began to realize that my own story was very useful in doing that promoting. And then within 2 years, became vocations director. So I was then not only traveling around the diocese, going to schools and parishes, but I was also fostering the guys who were coming forward for priesthood and going on the journey with them, visiting them in their seminaries. So that was a really exciting time. I really enjoyed that. Going around promoting vocations was hard work. And, walking into a school, a group of year 11s all looking at you, entertainers kind of thing, hard work, a lot of it. But also very exciting and lovely, accompanying students and watching them being ordained priests and stuff. That was a very blessed years. That was 9 years, including the time as promoter. And then the next shock was being asked to be the rector of the seminary, which took place in 1991. And I'd have to say that I was 11 and a half years. That's the most difficult mission I've ever done. Bishops used to come and say to me, "Oh, Mark, yours is a harder job than being a bishop." Really? Thanks for telling me. But yeah, it is hard because there's just a lot of levels of stress and living with the people that you're working with and having to make decisions about who might go forward and who doesn't. Really, really horrible situations at times. but also lots of blessings as well.
And how do you find public speaking, especially doing homilies? And so a lot of mass, all eyes are on you as the priest. And like, how do you find it now? And is it still as hard as it was earlier, if it was?
Obviously, and if you do something enough times, you get used to it on one level. But I'm still basically a shy person, and I've had to learn coping techniques. But there's a real sense of, a spiritual sense of when you're celebrating Mass and when you're preaching. It's really, if I was thinking that was just me, I wouldn't be able to do it. There's a whole prayer thing about placing yourself in God's hands, asking God to do the work, which in a sense is the spiritual route to psychologically coping with the whole thing. But I'm still basically a shy person. So after celebrating Mass, I will often want to just flop on the sofa at home. It does wear you out. Even though it's by God's grace, it does wear you out as well. And I think a lot of priesthood is about being out there talking to people. And I think for someone who's more of an extrovert, that side would be easier. And just because I haven't quite got that and I have to put effort into it, doesn't mean to say it's not for me. It's just that we all have different gifts.
Absolutely. And Pope Benedict the 16th?
Yeah.
He visited, there's only been 2 papal visits, right, to England, I believe, and one of them was in 2010.
Yeah.
And you were quite involved in that.
Yes, I had.
Yeah, you get to meet him.
The whole visit, obviously, I had a small part, but when the Pope came to us, it was a major thing.
How was that, like, for you? Did you ever think, like, I don't know, a bit surreal at times, considering like your journey?
Yeah.
And then
the whole thing was surreal is a very good word to give me, actually. I remember I was driving to Coventry one morning, sunny morning, in the car, and on the news they announced that Pope Benedict was coming to England. And I had to pull into a lay-by because I thought, oh my God, if he does come, he's going to come to Birmingham because of canonizing St. John Henry Newman. Yeah. And he's definitely going to come to Oscars. And I just had to pull in and just think, oh my goodness,
take it in.
I'm going to have to deal with all of this, And then, that was before the Christmas. And then by February, it was very clear that I was getting messages that he would, and I needed to be part of the planning committee, and I had to start going down to London secretly, because no one in the college should know that it was happening at that stage, partly because of not knowing all their plans, but also it was all to do with security and all that kind of thing. And I think seminary is a funny place because everyone wants to know each other's business. And one of the greatest achievements was that I had the Vatican and the bishop's team visit the college, the seminary, in a minibus one Thursday, which is the day off of the seminary, Wednesday, which is the day off of the seminary. And they were able to visit and do the recce, and no one knew. Managed to do it. But that was a lot of organization. And originally, the bishops just wanted to use the seminary as a venue for them to have lunch with the Pope after the canonized beatification in Cofton Park. And I said, no, you can't do that. The seminarians are the next generation of priests. It's their home. Are you really going to ask them to leave for the weekend so the Pope can come? They're the ones who should see the Pope. So I really fought for that. And then after I'd fought for that, it was then the next step was, well, the other seminarians in the other seminaries, they should see the Pope as well. So in the end, it became this enormous gathering because we had all the bishops, all the press corps, the seminarians from all the seminaries, all coming to Oscott that day. So it was an enormous organization. And then, of course, you had all the secret services. And checking the building beforehand for any devices, and guys with machine guns on the roof of the building, and oh gosh, the whole thing was extraordinary experience.
So it went from everyone leaving, the Pope can come. It's not only everyone from Moscow staying there, but even more people. So it's like a really beautiful gathering, I suppose.
It was extraordinary.
I suppose that was probably the most busiest time or busiest period, would you say, of your...
As time as that was the biggest thing we had.
Most extraordinary, I suppose, as well. Yeah. And I think just to finish on, what would you say you're most thankful for? It's a nice way to finish. In your priesthood, what are you most thankful for?
I'm most thankful that from the moment I said yes, it's not been an easy journey following my vocation, but it's been incredibly interesting, and there's been loads of excitement. And I mean, I haven't mentioned being parish priest here, for 10 years in Wolverhampton. Every stage of the journey has been interesting, it's been fun, there have been horrible struggles, but there's always been blessings in that whole journey, going back to 1977 in my bedroom, in bed, saying yes to God.
I see God's providence all the way through. Well, Father Mark, thank you so much for spending time with us. It's been extraordinary, really, hearing your life journey and your vocation, how it all came to be. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for joining us for Yes, Lord on Shekinah Europe.